across the land, iHeartRadio, JoePags.com, also Newsmax TV. It's the Joe Pags Show. Really glad to have you here today, and really glad to have New York Times bestselling author, it's Stephen Mansfield. He's written a book called Choosing Donald Trump, and it's a really interesting angle to the current presidency. Stephen, how are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me on the program.
Yeah, really glad to have you on, man. This is an interesting book to me because if I go back in history, and please correct me if I get anything wrong, in 2008, John McCain didn't get the evangelicals. I mean, if you counted who got more, he would have gotten more, but they generally sat on their hands. And the Christian right in 2012 for Mitt Romney sort of did the same thing. Could be for different reasons for those two candidates. Maybe they just weren't very good. Romney's religion might have played a role.
Yes.
This time around, Donald Trump got evangelicals to get up and go to the polls, which really surprised a ton of people on the left. Why did that happen? How did he make that happen?
Well, I think it had to do with the times, for one thing. Religious conservatives in America were really traumatized by the Obama years and terrified of the prospect of Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump, though not a deeply religious man throughout much of his life, his own admission, he had engaged in listening sessions with prominent clergy around the country, scheduled by Paula White, and he really understood the plight, the concerns, the fears, the anger of religious conservatives, and he reflected it. So I think it had to do with the times, again, the two people who people were afraid of. Yeah. I think it had to do with his mastery of the concerns of the people on the right. And I think the fact is that by the time we got to the general election, Donald Trump did not get most of the evangelical vote during the primaries. Yeah. But by the time we got to the general election, it was obvious he was the only guy who could win, and that's why religious conservatives went for him. It's
Stephen Mansfield, Stephen with a PH. Make sure you go and get his book. It's called Choosing Donald Trump. It's interesting because it's almost as if Trump watched what happened, or his campaign staff watched what happened in 2008 and 2012 and said, if we don't go and visit, if we don't go and meet with them, if we don't go and really listen, we have no chance of getting them. So is it a matter of McCain and Romney took them for granted and it didn't come through, and then Trump said we can't repeat that?
Well, I think that evangelicals and religious conservatives in America are a pretty forgiving bunch. But John McCain never really appealed to them very much. He was kind of suspicious of them. He'd been hurt earlier by some preachers and some tensions he'd had with Jerry Falwell. Right. So he was suspicious of them. And then, as good a man as Mitt Romney might have been, he was a Mormon, and surveys just simply showed that the religious base of the Republican Party were slow to warm to him. So Donald Trump comes along. Yeah, he's not a deeply religious man, but he is reflecting their concerns. He's talking about even, making sure we can say Merry Christmas, and talking about the Johnson Amendment. I'm not sure most of the other candidates even knew what that was. Right. And so he wins them. And I think it was to the extent, it was authentic in the sense that he was legitimately concerned about their concerns, even if these weren't lifelong concerns for him.
Hey, Stephen, how big a voting block is this?
Oh, it's pretty huge. You're talking about 81% of white evangelicals that Donald Trump polled. You're talking about half of all Roman Catholics and half of all regular church attenders in America. It was a huge block.
All right, so it was very smart for him to go after them. Let me ask you this. Again, it's Stephen Mansfield. The name of the book is Choosing Donald Trump, and we'll talk about how he's done a year later and how evangelicals feel today compared to how they felt when they voted for him. How about when that Access Hollywood tape comes out? Showing clearly his locker room talk, and he's having a conversation with Billy Bush, and he's talking in very lascivious, and sordid manner about women and what you can do if you're a rich guy. Did that set them back? Did they think twice about voting for him and maybe sitting on their hands again?
I think many evangelicals did have to really think twice about polling for Donald Trump. But two things. First of all, they're a forgiving bunch. Yeah. And I think one of the virtues of Donald Trump is that he has never claimed to be a quote-unquote holy roller. He's never claimed to be a strong Christian. He's never claimed to be a highly moral man. He knows that he even defended infidelity at one point in his life, and it was in the headlines of New York. So I think that was a virtue. And I will say that some evangelicals really found themselves in the squeeze because of that video. And so when some prominent evangelicals came out and said, well, boys will be boys, this did cause some tensions in the evangelical community. But still, what was the alternative? The alternative was Hillary Clinton, and that was just too frightening for a lot of religious conservatives to go with. So it ended up, as we all know now, not hurting him very much. And I'd have to say I'm surprised by that even to this day.
It's interesting because you're right. Donald Trump, when he first said he was going to run, the left immediately said, yeah, but he's been married all these times, and look at all these affairs, and look, he's chasing skirts his whole life. And he came on camera or went on the radio and he said, yeah, I mean, it's all out there. I mean,
Yeah.
he wasn't going to be like Bill Clinton and say, I didn't have sexual relations with that woman. He was going to say, I did. You guys know I did. And that's in the past. I'm happily married now for 11 years, and I've got a son, and I'm running for president. Why is that a thing? I mean, it wasn't a thing for all these years. For 45 years, I've been in the public spotlight. Why is it a thing now? I mean, did that really serve to quell all of that garbage?
Well, I think it is. I think that authentic approach from him, where he's not claiming to be more than he is. You know, the left has a certain level of hypocrisy about moral issues.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they are urging for the most part what evangelicals and religious conservatives would consider an immoral approach to many issues.
Right.
And then suddenly let a man like Donald Trump step to the fore, and suddenly the left is concerned about divorce, concerned about remarriage, concerned about all these things they never talk about otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And so Donald, I have a chapter in the book where I say, one of the appeals of Donald Trump to the average American is that they hear themselves in him. In private, they may speak in racially questionable terms. They have anger. They cuss. They are divorced or have loved ones who are. So Donald Trump feels to them authentic, and that's one of his virtues, whatever else may be wrong with him in the eyes of some voters.
His name is Stephen Mansfield. I want you to go and get his book. It's called Choosing Donald Trump. So let's fast forward a year. We just had the anniversary of the historic upset. Donald Trump electorally slaughtered Hillary Clinton at the polls. He won 30 states. She won 20. It was 305 to something small in the 200s. And the evangelicals had a lot that they expected from him. They expected he would be a man of his word. Has he been?
I think, according to the things evangelicals were concerned about and hoped for, he has been true to his word. The main issue, of course, putting Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, holding, at least talking a line, if not being able to actually execute a clear line with radical Islam. And many other issues like that, doing what he can do about the Johnson Amendment. He can't just outright abolish it. He has to urge a culture in D.C. against it. And so I think while there's been maybe a 5% loss of support in the evangelical community, according to some polls, for Donald Trump, that has more to do with NFL players and calling them SOBs and things like that. But for the most part, he's fulfilling the promises that evangelicals and religious conservatives held dear.
Well, he did the Mexico City thing right off the bat, but I think every Republican, every Democrat changes that right off the bat.
Exactly.
He also, he made a big issue out of religious liberty, made announcements, proclamations. We will have religious liberty. We will protect people's right to worship as they see fit and not force people and corporations that are Christian or Judeo-Christian based to pay for contraception. And now we're talking about the debate about baking cakes for gay weddings again. I'm guessing that this voting bloc likes all that.
They do like it. And I'll tell you the thing they see the most is that religious leaders have access in this White House. I mean, during the Obama years, Mr. Obama had many religious leaders in there, but evangelicals and religious conservatives weren't primary, weren't preferred. But Donald Trump is actually giving these people access. He's hearing their advice, and that word gets out to the religious conservatives in America, and they applaud that. So it's a good thing overall. So
going forward, what does he owe them? And by the way, it's Choosing Donald Trump. Choosing Donald Trump is the name of the book. Buy a copy, buy 2 or 3, give it to your family and friends. New York Times bestselling author Stephen Mansfield is the guy. What do they still expect? He's got at least 3 more years, if not 7. What do they want him to do that he hasn't done yet, but they feel good that he's on the way?
I think they'd like to see support for a ban on federal funding of abortions. I think they'd like to see a strong stand against federal funding of Planned Parenthood. I think they'd like to hear strong support for further religious liberty, a rollback of some of these restrictions on religious liberty. And I think they'd like to see some guarantee that we won't see lawsuits from the Justice Department against organizations like the Green family, owners of Hobby Lobby, that there'll be some protection. So mainly I think they're looking for a combination of a culture and then specific actions along those lines. But if they continue to give the religious voices access, I think most evangelicals will be happy.
I think the left in this country, I know the left in this country wants us all to believe, Stephen, that people aren't religious anymore, that religion doesn't mean much, that saying that we're a Judeo-Christian society is a fallacy. We're actually a society of a bunch of people who kind of believe and kind of don't believe. I think you and I both know that that's BS. Do you happen to know, and you might not, and I'm sorry for springing it on you, but do you happen to know the percentages of people that still firmly believe in a Judeo-Christian value system? I've heard numbers in the 70s to 80s as far as percent. Listen to the media, you'd think it's 5%. Do you have any clue?
Yeah. Surveys show that, first of all, 91% of Americans believe in God.
Yeah.
And then if you're talking about Judeo-Christian values broadly, you are in the 70% range. And if you're talking about people who would identify as religious conservatives, you're slightly above 50%. So there's no question by any standard we're talking about a religious country.
And these are huge numbers. So the indoctrination from academia, from Hollywood, and from the media, basically saying we just want a free for all. Nobody can tell me what to believe, and we don't not really a Bible thumping country anymore. That's really not true, is it?
No, it's not true. And by the way, if you're starting to talk about the Bible, the number of people who believe the Bible at least contains the Word of God, and if it's not exactly verbally the Word of God, is somewhere in the 60 to 70% range as well, higher than any other country in the world.
Isn't that stunning? All right, so the last question. I really appreciate the time. It's Choosing Donald Trump, New York Times bestselling author Stephen Mansfield. You got to go and get this. It's a great read. Last question. Heading into the next election, already you see the onslaught from the left. Do you think that the voting bloc that is the evangelical right, or whatever we're calling them, the evangelicals, is that bloc, is it really only 5% eroded? And do you believe that number to even be true? If it were 4 years from now, if it were 2020, does he still have their support?
He has their support unless there's a major betrayal. I think the hardcore, I'm from the South, so I call it the hardcore Bubba vote, is absolutely in favor of him. But we did see some disturbing trends in Virginia. I'm sitting in Virginia right now as we speak, in that gubernatorial race where, about 70% of the young vote went for the opponent, the Democratic candidate.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely some dicey numbers happening here. There's definitely a shift happening. But I think if Donald Trump maintains true to the values that he's been holding forth, continues to give evangelicals access, I think he'll continue to hold that Bubba vote, as I call it.
Now, I want to sort of make a part B on that question if I can.
Sure.
Because you brought up Virginia. Gillespie wasn't supposed to win anyway. That was already a blue governor state, although you do see demographic shifts in the state, much of it because of employees of the federal government that live in the state now. Do you think that any evangelicals sat on their hands because it was Gillespie? And had Gillespie actually asked him to come and campaign for him, he had Bush 43 campaign for him, Bush 43, who at the same time was complaining about Donald Trump. So had he had Trump come in, and he would have, do you think that would have helped?
I think it would have helped him. The problem was that he was unclear. For those of us sitting in Virginia, he, on the one hand, spent almost $500,000 on mailers talking about Trump's support, but then at the same time, he tried to run away from Trump. So it was a bit confusing. Yeah. I think the main trend, the main statistic I know that's going to be determinative is that young voters, the socially conscious millennials, are suspicious of Donald Trump, haven't been won by, at least in this GOP race, weren't won, and they could really determine things as more of them come online as voters in the coming years. So there's going to have to be some appeal to them in order for us to stay solid the next election.
I think that's very, very intelligent. All right, it's Stephen Mansfield. Go and get his book, Choosing Donald Trump. Stephen, let's talk again.
I'd love it. Thanks, Joe.
I appreciate the time. Back after this on the Joe Pag Show. Stay right here.